Never pick up hitchhikers. Hey, welcome to The Whole Truth, where I am taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and we are not skipping anything. If you love that idea, you can hit subscribe. If you really love this channel and want to support it, you can like, comment, and share. That helps the videos to go even further. And if you really love the channel and you want to support it, you can, if you're just like busting at the seams because you want to support it so bad, you can do that over at Patreon. You can become a monthly supporter and you'll have access to all of the study notes, and you can also get all of these videos completely for free over at thewholetruthbiblestudy.com. There's all the videos from Genesis until now in Judges chapter 9, and they're all completely free, and they're in a nice little package over at thewholetruthbiblestudy.com. So I hope you'll go over and check out that channel and maybe even consider becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon. But that's not the most important thing. Here's the most important thing. Take out your Bible. We have this wonderful source. God's word is available to us, but we have to read it if we want to understand what he has from his word for you and I. So I hope you'll do that with me. Grab your Bible, turn it open to Judges chapter 9. While you do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. I once was on my way home with my daughter, and I looked out, and there was a man on the side of the road with his family, a wife and a baby, and he was obviously having car trouble. Looked like he had a flat tire. I drove my daughter home, and I turned around my car, and in an effort to be helpful, I drove back over to go help this family, and I pulled my car off the side of the road beside them, and I said, "Hey, can I help you?" And he didn't speak very great English. He said he needed a tire iron. I had one, but mine didn't fit his. I had a one for my car, but the piece wasn't big enough. I didn't have one of the four, you know what I'm talking about, with the four sides of a tire iron. And he said, "Could you take me to the parts store so that I could get a tire iron?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'll let you go with me." And so he told his wife to stay back with the baby and stay with the car. And he hops in my car. The auto parts store is just a few minutes down the road. And we are just a few moments in the car. And then he, looking very upset, talks about how he doesn't really need this right now because he just got out of prison. And my heart went up in my throat, and I was like, oh man, like this guy, obviously he's having a bad day. He's having a, rough time. And, not to mention, I think it's a natural question to say, what were you in prison for? But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. I was just a little bit kind of intimidated, and thankfully everything worked out. But it was a good reminder, be careful what you let in, right? And that's certainly true when we think about life. Be careful what you let into your life. Well, that's what Israel demonstrates today in Judges chapter 9. They allow this man to come in and be their leader. They appoint this leader. They decide to do it. They allow him in, and things go south. And it is a good picture for us to be careful what we allow in our life, because the sin that you allow in your life ends up, in the end, it brings death. Well, read this with me. It's Judges chapter 9. We'll read the first 6 verses. Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, "Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. Which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone." And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. And their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." And so they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Bereth, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. Oh my. Now it already starts bad. It's going to get worse. This is one of those like, oh my word stories in the book of Judges. And so you might remember that this guy Jerubbaal, that's Gideon. Now Gideon is a good judge, or at least started out good. He's the one who defeated the army of the Midianites, who had 150,000 soldiers, and he defeated them with his 300 men under the inspiration and under the protection and the strength of the Holy Spirit who had empowered Gideon. And so they had this glorious victory. But remember, in chapter 8, Gideon, his life didn't end. I mean, his life ended well. He died in a good old age, but there were things that were holding him back. And one of them was, we talked about lust and greed, because Gideon had a lot of wives. And then on top of all of his wives, he has a concubine. He has the son of a concubine, from that concubine, and that son is Abimelech. Well, Abimelech starts out in this story. Abimelech comes to the men of Shechem, that's his hometown, and he says to the men of Shechem, why should you let all of Gideon's sons, 70 men, why let 70 men rule over you? Wouldn't it be better if one guy ruled over you? But be understanding, be clear that Abimelech has something in mind here. He's not just saying, oh, well, like, make me your king and make these people don't listen to these people anymore. No, he's got something in mind. The men of Shechem, the elders in Shechem, they heard him. They were like, you know what? Yeah, it says that they were inclined to listen to him. It was attractive what he was saying. So they go into the temple of Baal, a false god. They take the money from Baal and they give it to Abimelech. Abimelech uses the money to hire a band of raiders that they go to the 70 brothers. So his 70 half brothers, he goes to them, to his father's house, and begins killing them. Not only does he kill them, he basically lines them up. He's executing them on the same stone. Okay, they don't have a firing squad. They don't have guns, but they've caught all the 70 brothers. They drag them to the stone. And I mean, I don't want you to imagine too much, but can you just imagine for a moment? I mean, what a gruesome and graphic scene as brother one is killed. Now there's 69 brothers and they're panicked. You know, whoa, my word, what is going on? Whoa, Abimelech, what are you doing? But brother two, bam, killed him. Well, number 3, take him. Number 4, imagine, I mean, there's like 16, 17, 18, 19. I mean, this has been going on for a while. They're killing everyone, and they killed every one of the brothers except one, the youngest brother. He got away and he fled. There's the first thing that I would tell you when I'm saying be careful what you allow, and think about what Shechem just did. Shechem just hired this man to be their king, and his first action as their king, which they knew he was going to do, was to kill all of his brothers. Why did they allow that? Well, I'll take you back to that verbiage that they gave again. I'll say it here. It's in verse 3. And his mother's brother spoke and all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, and their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech. Listen, we have an inclination to sin. I'm telling you, you got to be careful what you allow in your life, because you and I, we have an inclination to sin. We have a desire for the sinful. Now, Christ can change that. Christ can work in us, and he can change that and change us from who we once were. But here, let me say it another way to help me make sense of this to you, or at least try to communicate, to make sense of what I'm trying to communicate. Just because you are inclined to do something doesn't make it okay for you to do that thing. I just spoke with a young man last night who's a little bit distraught over his friend who is a homosexual. And his friend has argued his homosexuality is not a sin. And he says it's not a sin because it would be gruesome and terrible of God to create someone with a desire for something and a want for something, and then that person could never act on that. That person could never have that thing that he wants so bad. And I told him, I said, you know, the danger in that is we are all sinful. And are you going to put any other sin in that same category and say, as long as I really want it? You know, I could take some other sexual sin and I could say something like adultery. Is adultery okay as long as I really, really want it. Like, for the people who don't really want adultery, but they just kind of happen to do it, is that okay now? Of course not. If you talk to anybody, I would say we have an inclination to say, hey, I would say it like this. This is what I even said to him last night. I said, consider for a moment, consider yourself. Have you ever looked at a woman and had lustful thoughts? Have you ever looked at a woman, thought she was attractive, and you would like to be with her? And of course, the answer is yes. And I said, but have you also looked at another woman, a second woman, and thought to yourself that you would maybe like to be with her? And he's, of course, had to say yes. And I said, so wait a second. You have an inclination, you have a thought life, a desire to possibly want to be with more than one woman. Does that make it acceptable? Is polygamy acceptable? Nope, it's still a sin. But you might have an inclination to do it. And if we take away sexual sins, that's a big one in 2024, where I am right now when I'm making this video. But if you take sexual sins out of that, what about something worse than that? What if your inclination is to harm someone? I was with a young man one time. He was a troubled young man, and we were walking down the road, and there was a little bird on the side of the road, and he said, do you ever have the desire to hurt something? And I said, no. Do you have a desire to hurt something? And he said, yeah, like if something's smaller than me, I just want to see it hurt. Like I want to be the thing to hurt it. Now that young man's obviously troubled. Does that make it okay because that's what he wants to do? You see, you have to be careful and recognize that we have an inclination to sin. So just because I want to do something doesn't mean it's okay to do. The reason that Abimelech's family and tribe wanted to follow him and not the 70 brothers is because they inclined their hearts to him. They liked what he had to say, but it didn't make it good for them to allow Abimelech to come into their lives and to allow Abimelech to come in and take over from the 70 other brothers who were the sons of Gideon as well. Look what happens next. If you thought that was rough, it's about to get rough. Look at what happens next. So I'm picking up now in verse 7. And when they told Jotham, he was the youngest brother. When they told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out. And he said to them, listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, should I cease from giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go sway over trees? And then the trees said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit and go sway over trees? And they said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, should I cease from my new wine, which cheer both God and men, and go sway over trees? And then all the trees said to the bramble, come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt with Jerubbaal and his house and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. But if you have risen up against my father's house this day and killed his 70 sons on one stone and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother, if then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come from the men of Shechem and Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech, his brother. So here we have Jotham, the youngest brother of the 70, comes to the men of Shechem after he's heard what's happened. They've killed each of his brothers. 69 of his brothers have died on one stone. I can imagine the pain and the anguish and the grief that Jotham felt. And he feels empowered to go and stand at the top of the mountain. And here's what he cries out. He gives them this parable. He says, men of Shechem, listen to this. And there's something about a parable I want to say before I describe the parable, and that is this. When you look at a parable, Jesus used parables to teach, and they're a great way to teach, but you need to look for one meaning. Like, that's the secret to understanding a parable. Look for the one meaning. What is God trying to say? This one thing that he's trying to say. The danger there, that's as opposed to saying, okay, well, this means this, and this means this, and this means this, and if that means this, and that means this means this. And so you end up with all of these meanings, and it can become a little confusing that way. Now, I'm not saying that there's not some, grand things to learn inside of a parable and inside of those individual things that we might learn, that we might hear from a parable. What I am saying is that it is best to understand a parable in its one meaning. So we need to look for one meaning. We can learn other things from the parables, but it's best to look for the one meaning, and then we learn from that. That's where we get our understanding, because that's the whole point, is to get to this kind of one thing. So Jotham stands up and he gives this parable. It's like an Aesop's fable. And he tells of the trees. The trees decide they want a king. And so they say to all the other trees, to all the olive trees, you be the king over us. But the olive tree is like, should I stop making my oil to come and be king over you? And so they go to another tree. They go to the fig tree and they say, hey, you be the king over us. All the trees are saying, you be king over us. But the fig tree's like, no, I can't be king over you. Am I going to give up my sweetness and my fruit to come and sway over the trees? No way. And so then they go even lower, and now they come down to a vine, and they say to the vines, you be king over us. But the vine's like, should I stop producing grapes and wine? Should I stop doing the thing that I was meant to do? And so they end up going, the trees in the parable end up going to the bramble, a thorny bush. Notice all the other things are worthwhile. They produce something. Olive trees produce olives and olive oil. Grapevines produce wine and grapes. The fig trees produce fruit, something that somebody can eat. But a bramble, it produces nothing but thorny branches and briars and things that are worthless. They're of no use to us other than to be lit on fire in a pile. They're of no use to us. The trees went to a worthless bush, something that produces nothing that's good for society. They went to a worthless bush and they said, you be king over us. Now, what do you think the one meaning of that parable is? Well, the one meaning is to say that all the people of Shechem have come to Abimelech and ask Abimelech to be the king. And Abimelech's first order as king was to kill all of the brothers, all of the sons of Gideon. He's produced nothing for them. He's done nothing for them. You see, Gideon had done good things for Israel. Even though Gideon had some issues at the end of his life, Gideon had done good things for Israel. Gideon had risked his life. That's what Jotham goes on to say. He says, look, if you've dealt righteously and good with Abimelech, then so be it. But if you've dealt treacherously with my father's house. See, his father was the one who was a good tree. His father was the one who had produced fruit, olives and grapes and figs. His father had been the good thing that they had wanted to be king. Remember that they went to Gideon. If you go back one chapter, they came to Gideon and they said to Gideon, you be king over us. But Gideon said, nope, God is supposed to be your king. That was in the last chapter. So this parable is matching up very nicely to say the trees asked the bramble to be king over them because they just wanted a king, but it's a worthless bush. And so he ends this parable with this prophecy. It's a parable, but then it's a prophecy. And the prophecy that he gives is this. He says, listen, if you've dealt treacherously, then let Abimelech, that worthless bramble, that worthless bush, let Abimelech turn on you, and let you, the men of Shechem, turn on Abimelech. You guys are going to turn after each other. Can I give you this very practical thing? The first one is this. When we talk about being careful what you allow in your life, we have an inclination to sin. And the second thing that I would give you is this. We have been warned about sin. We have been told what's going to happen. What Jotham just did by prophesying is going to come to pass. Well, listen to this. God has given us a warning about sin, and he has told us that sin brings death and destruction. don't lose sight of the warning that God has given you. If you want to be careful what you bring in your life, heed the warning that God has given us. Okay, now look what happens next. I'm now picking up in verse 22. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled, and their blood may be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who aided him in the killing of his brothers. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along the way. And it was told Abimelech. And now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came to his brothers and went over to Shechem, and to the men of Shechem put their confidence, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. And so they went out to the fields and gathered grapes from their vineyards and trod them and made merry. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. And then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech? And who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech." And so he said to Abimelech, "Increase your army and come out." And when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused, and he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, "Take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are fortifying the city against you. And now therefore get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be as soon as the sun is up in the morning that you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity." And so Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. And when Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood at the entrance of the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him arose from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, "Look, our people are coming down from the tops of the mountains." But Zebul said, "You see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men." And so Gaal spoke again, said, "See, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth trees." And then Zebul said to him, "Where indeed is your mouth now with which you said, 'Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out, if you will, and fight with them." I'm going to pause for a second and make sure we all understand where we are in the story before I get to the point. I've got a little bit more to read, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So 3 years in, Abimelech is the king. Do we all understand that? Abimelech's been reigning, if you will, but he's the man-made, man-appointed king, not God-appointed king. And so here's Abimelech kind of reigning as king in Shechem of Israel, and he's killed his 70 brothers to get there, but 3 years in, God sends a spirit of ill will. And so Abimelech begins to hate the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem begin to hate Abimelech. The men of Shechem start doing this thing where they're lying in wait, and when the people from Abimelech's family are coming in and out, they're literally robbing them. The men of Shechem are robbing them because they're just so angry at Abimelech. Well, this night comes that this guy named Gaal, they make wine, and then they get drunk, and they're having this kind of powwow, if you will, and Gaal is making these statements in the city. He's saying, "Why does everybody follow Abimelech? Who is Abimelech and who is Shechem? Why is everybody following him? If everybody would follow me, I would take down this Abimelech." Because remember, everybody hates Abimelech. And so then he stands up. You can see him standing there in kind of a drunken stupor, and he calls out and he says, "Increase your armies. Increase your armies." I'm making that voice up, but that's the way I see it. He's like, "Increase your armies, Abimelech." Well, he's rallying the people to go against Abimelech. And he even calls out this guy Zebul, and he says, "Isn't Zebul is the commander of his army?" Even Zebul doesn't like him. Well, Zebul was there, and Zebul heard about this. He was the commander of the army, and he was the commander in the city. And he sends word to Abimelech, says, "Abimelech, you better be warned. You better get up by night and assemble your army and come down, because they're going to come against you." Well, guess what? That's what Abimelech does. Abimelech gathers up his men, and he goes and he's on the side of the hill. He's on the side of the mountain. They come out in the morning from their kind of drunken party powwow. They come out and Gaal's like, hey, what's on that hill? It looks like people are coming. Well, Zebul, the commander, tricks him. He's like, nah, you see the shadows as if they're people. You think, in other words, it's shadows, Gaal. That's shadows out in the distance. Remember, Zebul's the guy that sent word to Abimelech. So Zebul, the commander, is like, no, it's just shadows. Well, Gaal's waiting, and sure enough, it happens again. He sees the movement. He sees them moving on the hill beside him. And there's a dog. And so he says, no, that is definitely people. I can tell that that's people now. You trying to get in the video? Come here. You want to say hi? Come here. Come say hi. Y'all, sorry for the interruption. You want to say hi to Everest? Say hi, Everest. Say hi, Everest. Okay. All right, now go. Okay, there you go. You got a little like mid video. If you made it this far into the video, you just got a little. Treat. You got to meet one of the puppies. Okay, so Zebul says, "Where's your mouth now?" That's what. Do you see the dog behind me? He says, "Where's your mouth now, Gaal? If you're so strong, go fight against him." That's where we are in the story. That's what's happening. Let's pick up and see what happens next. So pick up with me. It's Judges chapter 9, and now I'm in verse 39. So Gaal went out leading the men of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. And then Abimelech dwelt at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers so that they would not dwell in Shechem. And it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. And so he took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city. And he rose against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. And so Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he took the city and killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. And now, when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god Berith. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. And Abimelech went up the mountain Zalmon, and he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bough from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. And then he said to the people who were with him, "What you see me do, make haste and do as I have done." And so each of the people likewise cut down his own bough and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. What a mess. So Gaal makes this threat against Abimelech. Abimelech comes against Gaal. Well, Abimelech is beating Gaal and his family and his brothers and the people who were with him. He's beating all of them, but then he starts killing the people who are in the city. He's there until the next day. He goes to the next city over, and he demolishes that city, and he sows it with salt. In other words, like he's ruined that city that was there. He kills all the people of that city, but he's not done. The people they're still fighting. The people end up going up into a stronghold. They go up into a tower, and Abimelech is not about to let them go up in a tower. 1,000 people are huddled up in this tower, in this stronghold. Abimelech goes and cuts down branches and tells all the other men to cut down branches. They all go cutting down branches and put them against the tower, and they light the tower on fire and burn up all the people. Burned 1,000 people alive in a tower. What a mess is going on. But I need you to hear this. Remember that Shechem had invited Abimelech to be their king. And I told you this is all about being careful what you allow in your life. We have an inclination to sin. We've been warned about sin, but here's the truth. When you let sin in your life, sin will destroy you. The very thing that you've let in becomes the very thing that destroys you. We see this. I mean, such an easy example to see this is when you look at something like drugs. When you look at the addiction of drugs, the person that starts off on drugs, they start with that, with smaller drugs. They start with, you're going to not like me when I say this because you're going to think this is old school, but you start with something like alcohol or marijuana, and then you continue on with more and more and more until you want more and more and more. And then all of a sudden you look and you go, how did that person get where they are? I mean, I personally know a man who was a multi-millionaire who got mixed up with his girlfriend in meth and blew up the side of his house. Like, it's a crazy thing that drugs will end up taking people to. And you go, how did you get to that point? But listen, you better hear this. The very thing that you've allowed in, that you had an inclination for, is the very same thing that will end up destroying you. You need to be careful what you allow in your life. We've been warned, sin brings death. That's what God has warned us about. Well, does that leave us with no hope? Let's see what happens at the close of the story. Finish it up with me. I'm now in verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower, and that's in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled there and shut themselves in, and they went to the top of the tower. And so Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it, and he drew near the door of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman dropped a millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed me. And so his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man to his place. And thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers. And all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned on their own heads, and they came to the curse of Jotham, and on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. Remember what Jotham had said? That's what we just read then. What Jotham had said, and it ended up coming true, that all the men of Shechem, they had been cursed from what they had done by making Abimelech their king. You need to hear this. When you allow sin to rule in your life, something's going to rule in your life. You're either going to let sin rule in your life, or you're going to let God in your life. You're going to have God in your life, and he's going to break those chains of sin. But something is going to rule. The thing that you obey, you are a servant of that thing. So if you obey God, you're a child of his, you're a servant of his. But if you obey sin, then you are a servant to it. You're a slave to it. That's biblical. That's a biblical principle that we understand. So Shechem is warring against Abimelech still. They run up into this tower. There's more people from Israel, men and women both, run up into the second tower. Abimelech goes and he's like, I don't know how to take care of a tower. He goes and starts getting boughs from the tree, and he's going to bring them and lay them against the tower, and he's going to light the tower on fire. But when he gets close and he lays his branch on the tree, there was a woman who took a millstone and threw the millstone out, and it crushes his head. I think there's several things to be said about the kind of prophecy that we see there. Abimelech is representative of sin in the story. And what is the thing that destroys Abimelech? His head is crushed. You see, there was a prophecy in the Bible way back in the beginning when Adam and Eve had first sinned. God had given the world the curse. The snake's going to be cursed to his belly, and the earth is going to bring forth thorns and briars, and man is going to labor and by the sweat of his brow to eat, and women are going to labor childbearing and pain. And so the curse has been given. But then God says this. He says, the serpent will surely bruise his heel, but he will bruise his head. The Messiah is going to come and crush the head, bruise the head of the serpent. What is the hope that you and I have if we are inclined to sin and then sin brings death? What is the hope that we have? And the hope is this, that you can crush the head of sin. You have to crush the head of sin. If you truly want to be freed from it, what you need to do is cut it off. You've got to crush the head of that sin. And this is mimicking the prophecy that we've heard from Genesis. It's the thing that Jesus did to Satan on the cross, and the very same thing that you and I can put our trust in today. The one and only Jesus who died for you, and in his death, he has defeated sin for you. Sin that once had a stronghold on you has been beaten on the cross. Would you believe that? And Jesus, who died for you to pay for your sins, he rose from the grave, and he put sin and he put death to a public shame. And now today, sin and death are defeated, and you and me, believers in the Lord Jesus, can live in victory because the head of the serpent has been crushed by the one and only Son of God, who is the seed of a woman. And it was a woman who pushed the millstone out of the top of the tower and crushed the head of Abimelech. I hope you see the end of this is that Abimelech was destroyed, and all those people, all those things that they had done, God had returned their evil on their own heads. Listen, God is still the judge, and he is going to turn things around. He is going to judge this earth. No one is getting away with the sin that they commit on this earth. God knows it, and God is going to judge it. But for those of us who believe, he'll forgive. And so if you want that forgiveness today, it's by putting your faith in Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God, who lived for you, died for you, rose again for you. That Christ is the one who can crush the head, who did crush the head of the serpent, and who can deliver you from your sin. And I hope that you'll do that. I also hope that you'll come back tomorrow as we get into Judges chapter 10. I'll see you then.